Hello and welcome to episode 111 of the Reds Unrestricted podcast. I'm your host, David Comerford, and I'm joined by Farrell Keeling to discuss Liverpool's goalless draw with Chelsea. So, Liverpool and Chelsea playing out another 0-0 draw. I think that's about 5 in a row now. This was a game starved of clear-cut chances, you'd have to say. Chelsea thought they'd scored within actually a couple of minutes when Havertz kind of turned in from a corner. Turned out that was offside. And that was really all there was in terms of big openings. You know, Chelsea did have a couple of decent chances maybe at their end, but yeah, short on quality, short on entertainment, probably if you were a neutral, and just all a little bit frantic. And it's kind of as you were for both of these struggling teams. So, Farrell, let's go straight in with the 3-word match reviews and an assessment of the performance, please.
Oh, three-word match review. Meh, unenergetic, encouraging.
Decent. I think that kind of
How about you?
That kind of sums it up. I'd go with mid-table feel, or a mid-table feel if you're going to say mid-table's one word. It was 9th against 10th, and much as last week against Brighton, when Liverpool looked like a team who were below Brighton in the league, today they look like a team who were 9th in the Premier League, and the whole clash just had the feeling it was really scrappy. Like I say, there was very little quality in it. Neither of these teams would look at that and say that was their first choice 11, maybe, but even still, you can sort of see why the two teams are where they are in the table. To be fair, and it's not one of those that inspires that adding too much hope of Liverpool being a side capable of being where they want to be at this stage, which is in that top four. So yeah, that was what I tweeted after the game as well. It certainly had the feel of 9th against 10th. I mean, if we actually break down the game, you'd probably say Chelsea, obviously with that disallowed goal early on, started quite well. Liverpool, second best until maybe the last 10 minutes of the first half. Improved a little bit then, still wanted a bit more. Really encouraging start to the second half. For the first 10, 15 minutes of that fizzles out. And then at the end of the game was a little bit end to end and continued that sort of scruffy feel of both teams just trying to work a clear-cut chance. But, you know, there was players falling all over the place, tackles flying in, you know, it just wasn't really smooth and flowing whatsoever. So, I mean, how do you kind of assess that when it was so messy on the pitch? I mean, did you see it as a step back from Wolves in midweek? Was it building on that in any way, or is it just kind of you've not really gone anywhere? You just kind of stalled out a little bit.
I think my first initial thought after the game was, "Oh, this feels like a step back." Having had time to reflect on it, I'm not quite prepared to say it's a step forward. But I think the important thing is we're not going backwards with this. You know, I think we've seen so many times. You know, this season you win a game, you get your hopes up, and then we play someone worse, and then we end up losing. So as you said, I think you've summed it up sort of pretty well there. You know, momentum sort of shifted so many times in that match. And I think we're both kind of in similar positions to Chelsea in terms of needing probably further surgery, though our recruitment seems a bit less haywire than Chelsea's at the moment. I think the important thing is there were encouraging signs there. You know, the midfield that was selected, Klopp went for the bold call there, but the right call in my eye, which was Bajcetic, Thiago, and of course Naby Keita. Yeah. So I was personally very happy to see that midfield, and I think that selection call was vindicated yet again. 18 years of age, that lad Stefan Bajcetic, and produced another, I think, really largely solid performance in the midfield. That for me, that's my starting midfield until someone gets injured or we bring in someone. If we happen to bring in someone, I to be honest, I doubt it at this stage of the window that we'll bring someone in, but you never know. Last few days we've seen it happen before. I think bizarrely, but I mean, we've seen up until this point, the midfield has been the glaring issue in this squad. Yes, there were other issues across the pitch, but we all could point to the midfield and say that is the problem area. But bizarrely, I was watching the game and it kind of occurred to me that, I mean, one, the back line looks incredibly nervy. Just incredibly nervy. I don't know if that's just purely because Virgil's not there and his leadership and organisation, but I think even when he has been there this season, it's we've had like really good individual performances, but not really good. Not a good collective performance from the back line. Equally, bit problematic. I'm not quite sure what Jurgen was thinking positionally there. I think Harvey was good on the left, but realistically, your best bet would have been Harvey on the right, Salah down the middle, and Gakpo down the left. We've seen it. We've seen it at the World Cup. We've seen it at PSV. He likes cutting in from the left. That's where he thrives. Yeah. So I'm a bit baffled as to that. So I think he could have helped himself out a bit there. And I did almost wonder whether that nervousness that was sort of creeping from the back line, and not so much nervousness up top, but like, I suppose a lack of decisiveness up top, and that sort of mingled all together, and that was just sort of spreading this kind of negative atmosphere through the starting 11. And you could see that. I think the midfield was good, but I don't think it was phenomenal. And I think we had a few sort of misplaced passes from Keita and Thiago. But I think again, I really want to stress the midfield was the best part of that game. So I not quite leading towards a step forward, but I think there are some encouraging signs there. I think it's really looking like, once you put Darwin back into that 11, you inject some energy, you inject some enthusiasm. I think that's going to be Liverpool's best bet, provided we can avoid injuries with that midfield in terms of moving forward.
Yeah, it's hazardous from that point of view, I suppose. I want to talk about the team selection. I'm not too sure about it. I probably have a more ambivalent view than you do, I think, Farrell, because me and Dan were on the kind of pre-game podcast for this, and we said that we don't necessarily think Bajcetic is ready for the game. So when he went with him, I wasn't too maybe surprised based on his performance against Wolves, how Fabinho had done. But I didn't necessarily think it was the right call. I think it's kind of a grey area in terms of whether it was or not, really based on how it played out. I mean, let's not lose sight of just how big a call this is. I've just written an article about this after the game, and you have Fabinho. This is a player who's nearly made 200 appearances for Liverpool, 29 years old, one of the highest paid players in the squad. And you look at what he's won and what he's achieved, his sort of status in the game. A home match against Chelsea, which he should be completely fit for, and the 18-year-old who's never started a Premier League match before, I think he's only played sort of 8 times for Liverpool, full stop, gets the nod ahead of him. I mean, that is damning, really. That is a massive call from Klopp. And I think it's something as well which you have to take as a serious warning to Fabinho, because to me, I'm reading into that and saying, if you don't raise your game between now and the end of the season, we're going to have to seriously consider whether we want you to be our number one in that area, which was unthinkable, I guess, at the start of the season that would happen. But such have been his struggles, and obviously that wasn't the only sort of a meritocratic point of the selection. We saw Keita and for Henderson, like you say, Gomez starting this one after Matip had played the last couple in the Premier League, and we'll come on to Gomez a little bit later, I think. But yeah, but Bajcetic, I thought, had a sort of all right game. I mean, that yellow card was a bit frustrating, and there was the moment as well when he was driving forward with the ball, and then he was driving into a lot of space in front of him. And if you're Chelsea, that's probably exactly who you want to be running forward with it. And if Liverpool, it's maybe you don't want him to be the man who's in that position. And you could see he was a little bit short on confidence there. But yeah, I think he looked like, sometimes you see a youngster playing and you're like, they look really raw, or they look really on the flip side, that they look beyond their years. I think he looked like what he was today. I think he looked like a promising youngster, and he did okay. But obviously, you've already given your thoughts on the actual midfield selection, and fully supporting it. What do you think more generally of this more meritocratic selection? like I say today, there's been a lot of talk recently about whether Klopp's too loyal, but today he has quite bravely really backed those players who delivered against Wolves and dropped those who have generally been trusted by him, but just haven't been delivering in recent times.
I mean, you made a point right there that was looking at Fabinho's, the quality of his performances this season. And again, I'm right with you. Following on off the back of the prior season, I don't think anyone saw that ideal midfield of Henderson, Thiago, and Fabinho being changed anytime soon. Obviously, Klopp's had to make these decisions. I think they're necessary decisions ultimately, because I think I've got some stats here I've pulled up from Stephen Drennan's Twitter account just on the impact that Henderson and Fabinho, or the lack of impact, I should say, made when they came onto the pitch. So I think Nunes won 5 challenges in his cameo. Admittedly, I think Henderson and Fabinho had far less time, but both didn't make a single challenge in the game. You know what I mean? And when Klopp's talking, so several press conferences now about, look, when analysing like the quality of Liverpool's performances, it's at an absolute minimum, you need to be winning your challenges. That's not just the middle of the park, that's across the pitch. Again, evidenced by the importance of Nunes delivering that onto the pitch, having that presence up top, having that at the back, equally all important, especially when you're a club like Liverpool that defend from the front. But I think in terms of those selections, I think I'd be quite pleased just to see Klopp keep doing that, to be honest, keep rewarding meritocracy. This isn't anything new from Klopp. He said that from day dot when he first came, in 2015, he'd be prepared to reward not just quality on the training ground, but quality on the pitch. I think I see your point about Bajcetic, but I think largely I would say he didn't put a foot wrong. And I think we're at a point where we need not just legs, but that reliability in the middle of the park. And I think ultimately, if the likes of Fabinho, if the likes of Jordan Henderson aren't getting the message between now and the end of the season, I think we absolutely, and I know that seems bonkers to suggest, but we do seriously need to consider their future in this Liverpool squad. I mean, which is bonkers, partly because Fabinho is 29, I think. It's 29, I think.
29.
So you think realistically, on account of most holding midfielders of his quality, he should realistically have a career that's spanning well into his mid-30s, even despite how much the last seasons took out of everyone's legs. Arguments will be raised, of course. This Liverpool squad has climbed to the top of the mountain several times already. Do these players have it in them to keep doing that? You bring on a young player in Bajcetic, but a hungry player, and the difference shows. You bring on Keita, who has had a bit of a stop-start career at Liverpool, and it shows. It shows. He's there on the pitch. I think he's contributing. Similarly with Thiago, obviously he's experienced the highs at Liverpool, but he's not been around as long. And again, I thought he was phenomenal against Chelsea. So I think Klopp has to keep with the meritocracy, especially when we're not in a position where top 4 football looks largely guaranteed, which is an enviable position we've had of late in the Klopp regime. We need improvements going forward. I think it would be a disservice to opt for more experience when we know we're not necessarily going to get the performance that's going to match to that on the pitch.
Yeah, I think it's good to, some people would accuse Klopp of maybe not being responsive enough in certain situations. I don't think he got everything right today by any means, and maybe we'll touch on a couple of those things, but it was good at least to see him be a little bit more maybe proactive with it, rather than just trying to get the tune out of the same sort of group of players. And I think the Fabinho one, like I say, I just feel like it was a huge moment for him, and we'll have to see how he sort of responds to it going forward now. I think with him, it was, you look at the World Cup and he plays 90 minutes between the middle of November and just before Christmas, and you're like, okay, is that rest going to be what he needs? Because a lot of people have put his struggles down to fatigue. which might still be a factor, but his performances, I think, haven't really improved on the whole since then. So then you start to look at it and you're like, okay, so maybe it isn't all down to the physical side. Maybe subconsciously he needs the challenge that he hasn't really had from a player who can genuinely come in. And because we've seen Henderson there from time to time, but I think Klopp was saying today to Fabinho, look, I've got someone now who I seriously trust to step in if you're not going to deliver. And I still expect, slightly different to you, I think Farrell, or maybe different to what you prefer, I still expect Fabinho to start the majority of Liverpool's games between now and the end of the season. But, you know, if he's shown now that if there isn't a measurable improvement with him, then that certainly isn't guaranteed. And that's a good thing to have in the squad, whether, you know, you probably want someone who's a little bit further forward in the development and Bajcetic should play that role, but he's good enough that it might just be viable. We'll have to see on that. So our kind of plan with this podcast is to maybe look a little bit more at the negative side of things, and then touch on some of the positive performances, positive aspects later on. So let's think about the actual result in the game. We were talking beforehand about how it's a matchup of two dysfunctional teams, and those are the kind of teams right now that you backed as a Liverpool team to beat, as opposed to those kind of well-drilled sides who might be able to pick a hole through them. And Chelsea have, been quite flawed, certainly in terms of creating chances under Potter. It felt like it did feel in terms of relaunching those kind of top four ambitions that this was a game that Liverpool needed to pick up 3 points from. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's not a disaster. I think it's 9 points off the top four. That's the thing we need to keep in mind. Admittedly, it would sound a whole lot better if we got 3 and it was 7 points to Newcastle in fourth on equal number of games played at the halfway point of the season. But to be 9 points, I mean, I saw Jose Enrique sort of tweet after the game, that's it, no chance Liverpool make top four. I don't know. I think that's too defeatist for me. Maybe I'm being too positive in the situation, but I think 9 points, 19 games to go. You never know. You never know, because again, you look at the players we've got coming back. We've got Virgil coming back. We've got Luis Diaz. We of course have Diogo Jota, and you look at sort of having those influences, especially up in the forward line, when you've got players like Salah, who's probably not quite hitting the numbers he should be hitting. How much of that is due to the dysfunction across the rest of the squad isn't clear. But I think, yeah, absolutely. I think there's a case to be made in terms of Liverpool needed quality in midfield. We're probably not going to add that in the January window. And I appreciate the impact it's probably going to have on our top four push. But I think I'm not immediately worried. I think ask me again in 5 or 6 games, maybe. And if it's still, 9-10 points, then I think maybe I might be starting to get a point where, we're going to need to see an immediate improvement if we're going to catch these, especially when you look at, Newcastle, you can argue, are overperforming at the moment, probably with their squad. United have been hitting some consistency. Again, how long that will last is difficult to determine. But, beyond that, I think you'd say first and second, it's either going to be Arsenal or City, probably Arsenal at this stage. So 2 spots in there to play for. 2 spots in there to play for, and I think it's achievable for Liverpool at this stage. I mean, I don't know, how are you feeling with it at the moment? Are you confident, or are you quite a bit sort of on the fence with it?
I think in my head, I still have this sort of assumption that we'll be in there, but I don't know if that's denial more so than anything else, because like has there been sort of enough tangible signs that Liverpool are a Champions League level team this season? Probably not, but also because of the World Cup, we're a lot further back in the season than we ordinarily would be on the 21st of January. It is only the halfway point today, like you say. There's still a long way to go to to change the course of it, and he has to hit on a formula. If we look back a couple of years ago to the season where we had all the injuries, that's what he managed to do in the run-in, was to hit on a formula, and we had a great record in that stretch. That's what we need again. Right now, we haven't necessarily seen. I mean, maybe this midfield is the beginnings of that. Who knows? We haven't necessarily seen the turn and point come just yet, but not ready to sort of concede it whatsoever. I think there's still too long to go for that. But like I say, the blueprint is still either taking shape or still yet to be fully found, I'd say. Let's talk about a couple of the attackers. We'll start with Gakpo. Why was he still playing through the middle when Darwin Núñez came on?
I'm not entirely sure, to tell you the truth. I mean, there was the one instance, I think it was in the first half. I think it was Lewis. I think it was Hall he dispossessed. I think won the ball back. Shot goes over the bar. But like a really good exactly what you wanted to see from a Liverpool forward in a generally like high functioning Klopp team, winning the ball high up the pitch, creating a goal scoring opportunity. Perfect. Exactly what you want to see. And I don't know whether Klopp's been seeing more of this from Gakpo in training and wanted to just kind of experiment, but it just didn't. I mean, the experiment largely didn't. I don't think he played badly. I think there were some really sort of, again, encouraging moments from him. It's just not a, it's not an 8 out of 10 performance by any stretch of the means, but it's encouraging. But I think largely it just didn't really seem to work. I think Elliott it wasn't Elliott's position. I'm not too sure why that call was made. As I say, we know where Gakpo performs well, and it's on the left cutting in. We've seen that at the World Cup. We've seen that from the snippets we've seen him in playing for PSV. So I'm not too sure why that decision was made. I think, to be honest, Mo could have probably benefited from being closer to goal as well. So it wasn't just. It just wasn't a decision that made the greatest bit of sense. Again, I think it was probably leaning more towards the experiment, and I'd imagine going forward, especially having Darwin back, I'd imagine Gakpo will probably revert back to the left. Darwin will come central, and then it's just really a question, if we're looking at the system of meritocracy, of whether we keep Salah on the starting 11. Because I think, and I know that's, again, it can seem a bonkers suggestion, but I don't, if we look past the persona of Mo Salah, I don't think he's done enough to warrant a starting berth of late. I think I'd rather give the spot to Harvey Elliott, to be completely honest with you at the moment. Again, I appreciate it's a bit insane. We're talking about Mo Salah here. But if we're going to be speaking from a purely meritocratic sense, dump Fabinho, dump Henderson, we should be having that discussion about Mo Salah. We should be having that discussion. There have been players who Harvey's been performing a lot better, I think, than of late. But again, maybe that's a discussion for another podcast. I don't know. What did you make of the decision to play Gakpo centrally? Do you think it was just an experiment, or?
I think you can put him there for the first. What was just after the 60th minute when Núñez came on, wasn't it? I understand why he's playing there until then. I just thought I couldn't make sense from what I'd seen why you'd play two players out of position in that scenario, and yeah, it was a head scratcher for me. And with Gakpo, it's like on one level, there's mitigation for what I think has been a pretty flat start to his Liverpool career. Because this isn't his favorite position. Things, the structure isn't there around him, the confidence isn't there around him, all things like that. And that's why, sort of on the previous couple of podcasts, we haven't really spoke about him. I think today the positional thing makes it interesting. Having said that, he needs to. I feel he does need to be a decent centre forward option for Liverpool if he's going to get enough minutes, because Diaz is going to be, I think, the guy for Liverpool on the left. I think he's the Klopp player, really, more so than Gakpo, in terms of exactly what he wants from that position. And if Firmino's time at the club is coming to an end, say he signs a new contract, even then it could be his last sort of couple of years if he's not to leave this summer. So I think long term, I look at it and I think Gakpo needs to be a centre forward option. So he needs to learn in that position. It's a shame that he's been thrust into it straight away, I think, rather than playing in his favoured role. So hopefully now we get a run of sort of Salah, Gakpo, Núñez, with Núñez through the middle this time and Gakpo on the left. I think that is we've not really. I think we saw that against Wolves in that game. But if we can see it for a longer period, hopefully things start to click, and we'll have Jota coming back in not too long, hopefully. And I think then it comes down to who's how are they performing, and can Jota take their play any of their places off them. There were some similarities today between Gakpo and Nunez in that he was really, really snatching at chances, and he's done that a few times now. Desperate to get that first goal, and to have those players in the forward line who are, I think, Gakpo and Nunez especially do seem quite that they need the goals for the confidence. It doesn't seem to be coming necessarily naturally to them. And Salah is a player who I think it always has confidence, but I've been sort of making this point that he's not played well enough in the Premier League this season. And I think there was a discussion earlier in the campaign about it quite widely that Salah was kind of struggling and not getting the service, all that. Then it kind of went quiet. I think largely because of how well Salah was doing in the Champions League. I think he scored sort of 7 goals in the 6 group games. But if you look at it now, he's actually got after 19 Premier League games, Salah's on 7 goals. I mean, if Mohamed Salah finishes the Premier League season on 14 goals and he's fit the whole time, you think something's seriously wrong there, and that's what he's on course for at the moment. He's had the impact in the other competitions, and I think it's quite bizarre to see him score more in the non-Premier League competition than he does actually in the top flight. But that's what it's been so far, and as much as there are systemic problems at play, and you can say that for a lot of Liverpool's players this season, in his actual moments where he has the ball in a game, when he's in front of goal, and when he's out there trying to make an impact in other ways, he's not been doing well enough. I think today was another example of that. He had a bad game today, and maybe has escaped criticism a little bit. So I kind of, I'm not sure it comes to the point, as you say, where his place is necessarily under threat, largely because there maybe isn't a compelling alternative, but he definitely needs to step up. I have confidence that he will, because that's in his nature, I think, is to kind of drag the team up with him, but not been good enough from him in this Premier League season. He's almost saved his best form for the Champions League up to now. But like I said, let's come on to some of the positives for the final few minutes. I have kind of 2 in mind, Battle, so I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about those or maybe throw some other names into the hat. I would say Andy Robertson was probably Liverpool's best player. Thought he had a ropey start, should have got booked for that. I mean, that was a violent trip on Conor Gallagher. I was like, I'm not sure what's going to happen, like what colour card's going to come out here. Didn't get anything in the end. But yeah, so tricky start, really grows into it, though. He looked like the one, if anyone was going to inspire something, it looked like it was going to be him today. And also, a good day for the Joe Gomez fan club, which I think the honorary president of, because he was he played really well. He justified the decision, I think, of Klopp to include him, and should be his place to lose really until Van Dijk comes back, I'd say. But yeah, so what did you think of those 2? And anyone else we've not mentioned so far who you think deserves a shout out?
Yeah, no, I'd agree with Robbo. I was actually thinking as well to add with the Gakpo discussion. It really didn't even make sense not playing on the left, because I think the early signs when we introduced him to the starting 11, he seemed to be forming a really good understanding with Robbo. So for me, I thought, because I suppose the one criticism with Luis Diaz was that, obviously brilliant player, but perhaps didn't have total synergy with Robbo. Gakpo seemed to have that right from the off. So for me, it seemed, well, there you go. There's your left flank kind of sorted. I think that's a relationship you want to encourage on the pitch. So I think moving Gakpo centrally, you detract from that, whilst also detracting from Harvey Elliott's best position and probably the best use of Salah in that situation with those 3 available players. But yeah, I'd absolutely agree with Robertson. I thought he was, I thought he was a breath of fresh air. Runs into the box, like, one of our more offensive players really in that match, which was good but strange to see at the same time. And yeah, I thought Joe was good. I think there was a period at the start, I think, with that offside. Was it Gomez that wasn't looking behind him for the offside goal? I think
there was I think the Klopp was shouting man on because he had the ball played back to him, and then Havertz kind of just pounced and ran around him and got it.
Yeah. So there was that period, but I think other than that, I think solid. I think solid. Not maybe not setting the world alight, but I think reliable. Again, no goals conceded. And I think especially when they brought on Mudryk, I thought, it's like there's
as well.
There's a player that's ready made for the Premier League. That'd be very interesting to see how he does. In terms of players, I think I really want to talk about, I thought Thiago, again, just quietly, it's always the same with Thiago. Everyone seems to complain about a lack of goals or a lack of assists, but it's not really why we brought him into the team. Fundamentally, let's just get that straight from the off. And I just thought, it was brilliant. I think won 11 out of Liverpool's 46 duels in total. That's just Thiago. Out of 46, so almost a quarter of the total team's duels, which is insane given the kind of player that he is. That he's been basically lumped not only with being Liverpool's chief build-up king, but also in terms of we talked about challenges and Klopp talking about the need for someone to put a foot in and get that part right. That as an absolute basic right. He's been the most reliable performer in that particular department. I think he's been absolutely integral. I think even when he was placed in the midfield with Henderson and Fabinho, he was the one player that always put a shift in, and I think has been our most reliable midfield performer all season. So definitely need to be talking about him. Again, we mentioned Darwin earlier in the chat. Really encouraging. I think you could see him on the pitch like he was just cajoling his teammates. There was that real sort of. It's been a word that's been overused this season for its lack of, but intensity. There was a real sort of intensity about him. And I think it was a game that was absolutely crying out for him. And I think if he'd been a bit fresher, sort of coming back from that injury, and started, you never know. Liverpool might have just squeezed in one or two, and we'd be talking about a completely different situation in terms of our top four hopes. So I think those two, and you know what, a little shout for Alisson too, because there's another player that's been really consistent this season in a time where key performers have been criticised for a lack of consistency. I think Alisson key again.
Yeah, and on that actually, let's just check, because obviously we kept a clean sheet against Wolves in midweek, but the last one in the Premier League, you have to go back to, let's just see. Oh wow, this is a long way. It looks like, and I might have missed one here, but it looks like Liverpool won West Ham 0 on the 19th of October. So that's 3 months basically without a clean sheet. So thankfully we got one of those today. I think let's say if we can get Van Dijk back into the team, we can get this kind of front three and maybe try a little bit more to midfield. Maybe that is something. There were times today where Liverpool did look like they lack cohesion. I think especially for periods in that first half when they were struggling to kind of build through what was a good sort of setup for Chelsea. Definitely an improvement in the second half, but it's still it still definitely feels like a work in progress. More so than we all expected it to. But yeah, I think that about wraps us up for this episode. Yeah. So Liverpool's next game, back to Brighton. Not a very appealing one, but at least an opportunity for redemption after that dreadful game recently. So chance to continue our defence of the FA Cup. But in the meantime, if you're listening on Spotify, follow the podcast so it pops up in your feed. Please give it a 5-star rating, and you can press the notifications button too, so you get a message every time we put out a new episode, and sort of same for every other podcast platform as well. And we're uploading episodes to YouTube now, so if you are watching on there, like the video, please, if you can, subscribe to the channel, and you can also add notifications on there too, and also obviously tell your friends about the podcast as well if you're enjoying it. So that's going to wrap us up for this episode. Thanks Farrell for jumping on, and we'll see you next time.
Sure.